Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll let some other people join as we go in, but I want to welcome you all today. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to be here. And I think that we have a very diverse group, both in terms of experience, in terms of geography, in terms of background, in terms of points of view on venture capital. So I think we're going to have an exciting conversation today, and I want to say welcome and thank you guys for being here. So after a fun call yesterday, we actually ended up refining the conversation a little bit. And so we found that with our different definitions and experiences within venture capital, we wanted to kind of start off by discussing that a little bit. So at first, we're going to go through and introduce all the panel speakers, and then we're going to have two different main conversations. One on the tension between the innovator and the investor, and then also a second conversation on what are the challenges and opportunities to venture capital culture going forward for these potential mass amounts of innovation, meaning, you know, things in outer space, things that we can't predict that wouldn't fit in the traditional venture capital model. So this is what we're going to go through and talk with you about today. So I'm Robin Connolly. Nice to meet you all. My background is I'm a serial entrepreneur through multiple family generations. And I have a finance and law background, which were acquired strictly to support my entrepreneurial ventures. And I also had a venture capital company that I ran for clean tech in Dubai and Hong Kong. Back in 2007 to 2015 approximately. And then I turned my interest to actually, how do I support the entrepreneurs and primarily their lifestyle? Because I found that there wasn't a lot of support for them, and instead they were kind of being pressured from every angle, and that level of pressure and stress mount up. And I had several of my investment innovators kind of have breakdowns and actually destroy a lot of value in our portfolio because they were overstressed and they weren't doing enough to take care of themselves. And so that became my passion for the past 8 years, designing programs and trying to support their lifestyle decisions. And how do they design a lifestyle that most supports being able to make extremely hard decisions under very high levels of uncertainty, you know, and over and over and over again for the longest period of their life. So this is what I've been working on, is called lifestyle optimization. And I'm excited to speak with you guys about that some today. So I'm going to pass it now to Sudhir Perla, sorry, I call you Perla. Sudhir to introduce his self.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I mean, I'm Sudhir Perla, like Robin said. I'm based out of Dubai. And essentially, I mean, I wear two hats right now at the moment. I call it as the yin and the yang hats of the work that I do. The first part of it is I'm basically the country head for a company called Tabreed for India. Tabreed is a Dubai-listed entity that provides cooling as a service, essentially. I mean, and given that the Middle East, cooling is an essential utility. We are expanding into new markets like India. So I'm leading the expansion into India. And it's a lot more sustainable alternative compared to conventional ways of keeping people cool. So I'm the country CEO for Tabreed India. That's my formal role. That's my yin side, because it's all about sustainability. It's all about urban planning and a lot of the feel-good aspects of I mean, the kind of work that I do. And along with that, 7 years ago, I started a private aviation company called as Jet Set Go. So I was a co-founder for the private aviation company, and it is now India's largest private jet company that's out there. And so from starting off as a marketplace, it moved towards essentially a model where we started controlling supply and controlling the experience for people who are flying private, especially the ultra-HNIs and chairmen and CXOs of large groups, towards a more asset-heavy kind of a model. And we're exploring more and more opportunities on the urban air mobility and the flying taxi front. So I'm not actively involved in Jet Set Go, but I was the co-founder and I still continue to be involved in it, and that's, yeah, so that's broadly what I do, and I'd love to talk more about this as we go along. So yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sudhir. Let's move to Enrico for your introduction. And I do want to say I love Hanson's idea. So the rest of you in the room, since we kind of have an intimate session today, we'd love for you to also introduce yourself in the chat as we go as well. So I'll pass it to Enrico now.
Hello, everyone. thank you, Robin, for organizing the event today. I'm really pleased to be here. And yeah, I'm Enrico. I am an Italian lawyer. I work mainly in the VC field. I am from the northwest of Italy, so I studied and qualified as a lawyer in Turin, so quite close to Milan. Worked for some years, you know, in big law, in corporate M&A, and last year I spent an year in Oxford with Miguel, who is on the panel with us today. We took together the Master in Law and Finance, and the MLF was key to my decision to switch from you know, traditional corporate M&A to VC, which I find much more exciting and interesting. And I'm now working as a lawyer based in Milan. So thank you, and I'm leaving the floor to Miguel.
Okay, thank you. I was just not sure if Robin was going to interject there, but thank you so much, Enrico, for the handover. And I suspect, you know, I feel so lackluster, I guess, following my three distinguished panelists. But hi, everybody. I'm Miguel. I'm an attorney, a senior associate at Vincent & Elkins in London. I started off actually as an economist. I principally, my research as an economist principally revolved around kind of productive inputs, macroeconomics, and resource economics. But I always knew that I had an interest in law, particularly on that convergence between law and economics. And so I then transitioned into being an attorney and thought that the best use of the skills that I had acquired thus far in my somewhat long and storied academic path would be to focus on corporate law. I am in the mergers, acquisitions, and capital markets team at Vincent & Elkins. I predominantly specialize in private equity and venture capital cross-border investments. I sometimes dabble in capital markets, but that's kind of just a distraction. I find that I really am in stride and feel most fulfilled when I'm acting for clients, predominantly financial sponsors or large corporates in private equity and venture capital transactions, because it fuses my interest really well in terms of I am largely operating in a legal capacity, but I find that I view myself as a trusted advisor. So I'm able to kind of speak to the commercial aspects of these transactions. And within the space that I predominantly operate is within the circular economy. So not dissimilar to Robin in that a lot of my clients are looking at making investments in ventures that are going to repurpose a lot of the waste that we produce as a global community in an attempt to kind of reconfigure that. And I think that's pretty cool. And so I'm always happy when I'm involved in a lot of these innovative and exciting ventures. So thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Love it. We have a great panel today. And as you can see and hear, we're very diverse. And so that's going to make for interesting conversation, I suspect. We had a very interesting conversation yesterday. So where we want to start the conversation is to discuss the tension and the culture between purpose-driven innovators and also profit-driven investors. And so Sudhir and I both have a passion, and we are in developing economies in particular, but we both have a passion for purpose-driven entrepreneurship and innovation. And we talk about that a lot, actually. And so that's the kind of area that we like to dabble in. And we like to think of the idea that the ideal pairing between an investor and an innovator is when their actual purpose and underlying values align, not just, is this going to fit beautifully and perfectly into my portfolio, and is it safe and secure, and I know I'm going to get my return back out. So we like to talk about that a little bit, and we're going to have Enrico and Miguel kind of take the counter side of that a little bit more and back the investor's case for as to why that may or may not be so appropriate. So we're going to start with Miguel, and he's going to give us his observations that he's experienced thus far around this relationship.
But many thanks for that brilliant introduction into the story. And as Robin expertly outlined, my background is predominantly with representing financial sponsors and large corporates. And so my experience is approaching it from that perspective. I think we had a bit of a, I think, tussle in terms of using the word tension, because I think the idea about venture capitalism is to, bring together the resources and the amazing ideas and to try to create a productive outcome, both for the principles involved in the transaction, but also, query footnote for the community. However, I think from the perspective that a lot of my clients are approaching it, there is a structure that has to come with their participation in venture capitalism. And sometimes that can be a bit rigid and or potentially obstructive of vision. And so I think there's a lot of things that we need to necessarily unpack with respect to that. But with respect to financial sponsors participating in venture capital, a lot of times they are intermediaries, they are aggregators of funds. A lot of the limited partners, somewhat being a little bit technical in terms of understanding or peeling back some of the layers in terms of just understanding, okay, we're looking at a venture capital firm, but and they're the representative, that's the brand that you're thinking about, but they are effectively an agent on behalf of a diverse array of people that have entrusted their funds to them. And so there is a moderating impact in terms of what they're willing to accept from potential partners in the VC space to ensure that their fiduciary obligations that they do owe to their ultimate investors is protected. Does that potentially limit or create a parochial scope with which that they would fund potential ventures, think about or conceptualize the merit of potential ventures? Potentially, and maybe that's something we need to be able to overcome. But I do think that structure is needed, certainly for the position that my clients find themselves in.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You have some valid points. We're gonna get back around to them. I hear what you're saying. Sudhir, how about you? What do you think about this?
I think I was just going to get back to Miguel actually exactly on that, Robin. So the thing is, even before getting back to him on some of the things that he said, and leaving aside the form and the structure of how things work and what you call as tension between innovator and an investor. If you just take, a couple of steps back and go a bit deeper, I would say that, ultimately, motivation is primarily intrinsic, right? All of us, whoever, whether it's an investor, whether it's a founder, whatever it is, what we're trying to do is basically connect, see what you're doing and connect with my search for meaning. And I would think that probably at a deeper level, everyone would be looking at something on those lines, right? And if I can even quote, say, Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese poet out here, he in fact actually said that, work is love made visible, and work can be part of a calling, part of a search for meaning and why we exist, right? So as you start looking at it that way, and basically you start finding that match between what you believe in, and essentially looking for like-minded investors, like you said, who also to some extent, of course, they need to protect the interest of the principals and also and ensure that the returns are met, but at least if they can resonate more and more with that purpose, and also in turn with their sense of meaning that comes from making that investment, I think a lot of the boundaries and the tension would kind of automatically start falling away or get more blurred. And even moving aside from, say, startups to a larger corporate, and where even there is a lot of innovation as well. I would think that, a big part of having an innovation-driven culture and creating more value would be either individuals, a company finding out what that search for meaning is within an individual and marrying that with the search for meaning for the organization as a whole, in which case there's this magic would happen. Or basically, people looking for companies where they could actually resonate with in terms of what they do and the work style and the culture, to be able to be at a place to innovate and create, right? So yeah. So I would think that, structures, protecting the fiduciary duties of investors and so on is important, but ultimately it goes down into that real thing of what is my purpose and what is my search for meaning, and then building up from that in a way that kind of makes it work in a more holistic way.
Yeah, of course, I love that. But I do want to hear from Enrico. What do you say on this matter?
Thank you, Robin. Yeah, building a bit on what Sadir just said, I think that this very traditional distinction between profit driven and purpose driven, in my experience, is literally falling apart, and it's probably it's a very recent phenomenon. But if I think of the last 10 deals I've been involved in, as an advisor, this distinction really no longer exists, because in my experience, when I started working, saying that an investment had to be sustainable or purpose driven was kind of of a political statement to some extent. Now it's a market requirement. Like all the startups I have been working for on the investor sides or on the company sides in financing rounds recently, all have a purpose which is beyond the profit, and this is for maybe not for passion or for true belief, but just because you are expected to do so by the consumers, by the clients finally. So when after we talked yesterday, I was trying to put together some ideas about this topic, and I thought of the last startups I've been working for, and they are literally three. One is a startup which developed an algorithm to reduce energy consumption, and of course they label themselves as purpose driven. They want to tackle climate change, they want to reduce emissions, and so on and so forth. I of course I don't know if they truly believe in their potential, but if you visit their website, they that's something they really stress a lot. The second one is a startup reducing the consumption of plastic. So I mean, again, the purpose is pretty clear. And the third one is a startup which is trying to tackle food waste by transforming wasted bread into beer. And again, I will say that the purpose is clear. And so I'm not just to wrap up. I'm not sure you in 2021 in venture capital you still can clearly divide between profit-driven and purpose-driven, because in my experience now, purpose means or is a pre-requirement to profit. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I will add my little part in here too, which is that, when I started my venture capital company in Dubai, we were clean tech. And at that time in 2007, we kind of looked like aliens. Everyone was like, what are you talking about? This is like an oil economy. What are you talking about? Wind and solar and, geothermal and stuff. And I think that at that time, or a little bit past that, we then experienced greenwashing, and now we're kind of experienced wellness washing. And I think, wellness washing, meaning we care about our employees. And I think, COVID happened and we all feel like we had to kind of go into our cocoons and then show back up. And now they're trying to say, come back to work and be in the office. And now people are realizing that they need more rest, they need less stress, they need to take care of themselves a little bit better. And so there's large corporate incentives and packages coming. And actually, that's a big part of the economy that's rolling right now, are anything that has to do with supporting the individual, helping them be better versions of themselves, helping them to eat well. I mean, that's huge, right? Helping them to exercise. You have Peloton and Mirror and all these, huge companies coming out with all kinds of ways to support the individual. And I think that being purpose-driven is a significant part of that. In my 8 years of working in the space, I think a key part to being well is to have a purpose. And that becomes a key indicator of happiness and fulfillment in life. And I do believe that we're reaching a stage, and I talk about this a little bit in some of the other work that I do, which is that we've been in kind of a fear-based economy where their scarcity ruled, right? And I think that we're kind of in a transition point to where we could be moving towards a more abundant point of view on innovation, on well-being, on life, because we don't need to just hoard resources now. We're starting to have enough innovation in the world and enough connection, and the diversity is still here, but because the world is getting smaller, meaning we can travel all around and experience different cultures and different points of view, we're becoming more willing to work together. And I think in doing that, you're going to find that going forward, this purpose-driven thing is going to change a little bit. And what it's going to change into is everybody wants to save the world, right? Everyone wants to be Elon Musk. That man has set a huge bar for all of us. And, Jeff Bezos is on his tail. And so are a few other people, Richard Branson. And I think that as you were saying, Enrico, every startup has to have the front cover story. I'm going to change the world. That's what I'm doing here. Because in some way, and I think Sudhir would agree, we talked about a little bit, is that you're looking for the passion and the innovator, right? Like a big part of that gut check on whether you want to invest in something, particularly high risk venture capital, is typically, what impression does this person give you? Are they all in on this thing? Are they going to dedicate their lives to this? Or is it something they're kind of like dabbling in on the side? Or that they're, adding to their resume or whatever it is that the alternative approaches could be that I'm totally unfamiliar with. So I think it's very interesting that you say that, Enrico. And we talked about that a little bit yesterday, where it said, hey, is the purpose-driven part just like a cover page that's required to be there, but that the investor just sort of skips over and then gets right into the financials? Is that the case? And I think that where it took us yesterday in our prep conversation for this one was that, well, what does innovation mean? Because inherently, innovation to me means you're doing something no one's ever done before. You're carving a new path. You need to be able to make mistakes. You're going to have a bunch of failures. And that's got to all be part of the learning, because it's part of the feedback loop that you get. So the question, I guess, that we're going to move into now is, what is the difference between this innovation concept where we're talking, we're going to be mining asteroids, we're going to be going to Mars, we're going to be setting up Disneyland on the moon or whatever. No one's ever done that before. And we cannot predict the risk that go into that. I mean, we can to a point, but a lot of that, again, as I'm saying, is this kind of the well-being of the people. Like if you're going to send astronauts to space, they need to be in the best shape of their life, and they have to be able to handle extreme versions of uncertainty. So now we want to get into a little conversation of, the world is changing. We're on an experiential innovation curve. We're going straight up now. Exponential, sorry. I use experiential in my business a lot. Exponential technology curve. We're going up. Crazy things are about to start happening that we cannot even really imagine. And we need to support communities of people doing true venture capital, true innovation, where they're going to make a lot of mistakes. And then you have this other version of venture capital, which is more the current version, the traditional version, which is defined as we defined it yesterday. It's more of incremental improvements. It may be something that hasn't been done before, but it's really just a tiny, 1 or 2 step build onto something else that someone's very familiar with. So that is a form of innovation, but it's more of incremental innovation versus literally doing something that no one's ever done before. And I see we have some very interesting people in the room with your introduction. So I'm super excited about that. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to give each of the panel's members 2 or 3 minutes to talk about this. And then I'm just going to open it up to the room. So I would like to hear from all of you, if you're willing. If you want to speak in some particular order, or if you're particularly excited, just hit the reaction at the bottom and raise your hand, and I'll make sure call on you guys. So I'm excited for this to turn into a very interesting dialogue. So I'm going to start with Sudhir. Please give us your observations and experience on the concept of innovation as something no one's ever done before, or versus the concept of incremental innovation.
Yeah, I think, like I said, Robin, you set the context extremely well, right? And the thing is, we are increasingly getting into a phase in time where basically there is more and more and more and more of at least a section of individuals. I wouldn't say societies. Looking at the step change innovation of thinking of these moonshots and these really, really big dreams, big visions, big bets to really sort of catapult us as a race to something which is probably far beyond what we could have possibly imagined, right? So, and the thing is, for that, I would say category of real big change, big step innovation. I would think if you go back to the context of venture capital funds and is there going to be capital available? Are there going to be individuals who can actually kind of go after those real big step change kind of things? I would say probably difficult, right? You need probably the more Elon Musks, more Bransons of the likes, these ultra HNIs, who probably already found their purpose in what they've done. And now, if you extend the concept of meaning a little bit more and throw a few billions around here and there, and you know that it really probably would only get you more meaning and more kind of recognition and sort of, that sense of being able to, I guess, again, find your purpose in a way. That could chase, it's only that kind of money that could probably chase this kind of opportunities, I would think, right? Mainstream venture capital funds and mainstream, most of the VCs, again, they have a fiduciary duty towards their investors, who are mostly, I would say, pension funds and insurance companies and so on and so forth, who already by allocating capital to a VC are looking at this as risk capital. Now, within that, if you look at basically a VC taking big bets on something that's never ever been done, which has an extremely high probability of failing, I would think there could be, exceptions, but probably there would be more exceptions than the norm. You really need to hope that there are a lot more billionaires being produced who are as eccentric as Musk to be able to take those big bets to kind of take us in that direction. And ultimately, once that happens, there needs to be capacity that needs to be built. And that capacity could, of course, be filled through incremental innovation, through a lot more of the venture capital funds and so on, right? So I think both are there to stay, and you probably, would need to kind of hope that things go in this way, I would think.
Thank you. I think let's open that up in the conversation, right? So if we need to hope that things go that way, what things do we need to change? What culture changes do we need to make to encourage things to go that way if we want them to go that way? So I'm going to pass it now to Enrico and let you give us your observations on this subject.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. So yeah, again, after our conversation yesterday, I was thinking, I was in my bed yesterday night thinking on what would be my stance on this point. And again, so I think that, but it's quite obvious. VC investors in general tend to be, less risk averse than other kind of investors, but still, they to some extent they are risk averse. So radical and disruptive innovation is always tend to be always very scary. In my experience, VC investors are not so interested in radical disruption because you have a big question mark on on the outcome of the venture. In that case, usually they prefer to, for example, the VC funds I work with usually focus on improvements of current technologies, of current drugs, if they are active in the pharmaceutical sectors, and so on. The reasons for this are pretty obvious. When you face something totally new, it's difficult to find the resources. The knowledge could be a problem because, if I want to go to Mars, there is so much knowledge I need, which is really difficult for one team to have. And I think that the most hard part is time. The time horizon of an investment is not, of a VC investment tends to be not compatible with the radical disruption, which may take years, as Miguel anticipated before. Limited partners want their money back after some time, and this doesn't match very well with maybe revolutionary innovation. Still, sometimes there are, I think there are like sparks, like when men discovered fire, which happens by chance, and I think of a quote of an entrepreneur in Italy who is disrupting the housing market, because so he is the founder of Casavo, and he said, I was lucky because when I founded Casavo, which is a platform to buy and sell real estate properties quite easily, and he said, when I started that, I knew nothing about that market, and that's why I dared to try something completely new. And in the end, it was right. He created something brilliant, but literally out of his non-expertise of the market. So sometimes you can have radical innovation without even planning it. So I will leave the floor again to Miguel, right?
So
Miguel,
I'll pass. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Enrico. I think you bring up a good point. I mean, I think that we need to make sure that we're clear that we're not devaluing incremental innovation, because that I think is super necessary, and I think that it's a vital aspect of venture capital. And I think that we do want to be clear that that's important to society and to progress, because we need someone coming behind and putting the structures into place, and then taking the ideas and implementing them regionally and locally as well. So I think that part is key. I want to make sure that we don't skip over that. So Miguel, please share your thoughts on this subject.
Certainly, thanks so much, Robin. And I'm surprised, given, and maybe Enrico is going to be a bit surprised, given the heated debates we often have with respect to economic policy. But I think I just want to kind of, by way of prologue, react to some of the things that were discussed in the first section, and that will fit seamlessly into my then response directly to your question, Robin, which is that I think passion and purpose are amazing animating forces for the innovator and for the founder, for the entrepreneur, particularly somebody who describes themselves as you do, Robin, as a serial entrepreneur. I think that's a very, very important core of existing and operating. However, I would point out that has to then be contextualized in the sense that the funding is coming from a capitalist society, and these are just not tangible things that I, as an advisor to the financial sponsor and or a large corporate entity that I am acting on behalf of, can then present as something that can be easily or tangibly assessed or accessed as a way of determining whether or not they can then invest money into this particular venture. And that's unfortunate. And I think that that's one of the things that we were discussing in the previous one about the tension about whether or not some brilliant ideas go unfunded or underfunded, precisely because the passion and purpose has to operate in a rubric. And that's unfortunate, but I don't see how we're going to move away from that. And that then bleeds nicely into this understanding of, well, does our understanding of venture capital and the way that it continues to work in orthodox understanding limit innovation? Does it limit what we think about is possible or achievable? And potentially, and as you and everybody else on the panel has noted, it probably is more suited to incrementalism, precisely because, for example, whenever I'm preparing the investment committee memo that then has to go to the investment committee to decide whether or not the ultimate investment is going to go ahead, notwithstanding the fact that the commercial team that's operating on the ground believes in this particular venture and believes that they want to make this investment, they now have to convince X people to 3 people sitting higher up that this is going to be a credible investment, and the passion and purpose will filter into the narrative. But as you kind of quipped earlier, that's probably going to be skipped over. They're going to go to the projections and financial analysis. How are we estimating future cash flows? What are we thinking about in terms of our exit return? How does this fit into the investment profile? And as Enrico noted expertly, a lot of these financial sponsors and or large corporates do have an investment profile. And so that's unfortunately another limiting factor that we do have to parameterize and try to optimize over. And I guess not wanting to be a Debbie Downer and constantly and suggest that this is all impossible to overcome, but it is something that I think we need to be intentionally mindful of and try to try to work around. And I guess some of the ways that I was thinking to throw out there, and I guess hopefully you can react to, Robin, and the wider group, is that, you know, there is cooperation is fundamental. I've acted on behalf of clients that have been investing in radical innovation alongside a lot of other VC and large corporates with disparate investment profiles. And that then allows for the particular venture to acquire the funding that it needs because they are spreading the risk across a broader array of participants. And that's a very functional and accessible way that we're able to do that. Obviously, there's a lot of complicated, I guess, financial instruments that I negotiate on behalf of my clients to also allow for them to participate in a lot of these I guess, high risk, quote unquote, aspects that, you know, earnouts and the like, or performance participation instruments that allow for kind of a somewhat complex, but then that gets into the conversation as to whether this complexity is helpful in and of itself, and or that is kind of prohibitive as well. I don't have the answers, but I do think that there is a way to allow and facilitate a more radical approach, but it is something that is not contemplated in abundance in the way that venture capital operates today. Thank you.
Thank you. That's so interesting, actually. You know, do we have instruments in place, or do we set up relationships and structures to take something that the risk might be, you know, unbelievably high, and then combine it into some sort of package with lower risk concepts to make sure that you kind of put a floor there, right, as to how much you can lose. I think that's super interesting. And I love that, you know, you brought up that you are working on some of those kinds of things. I think that's not traditionally something that, you know, I'm exposed to or that I even speak to anyone about. So that's super exciting to hear. I also wanted
one
to just
point to that, Robin.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, and that's actually a great point that we get brought up, because I mean, even in our instance, for example, for Jet Set Go, when we saw all this innovation and developments happening in the eVTOLs and the flying car space, with number of startups that were getting funded, pretty much, whether it was Boeing, whether it was Airbus, Google, there's a lot of talk of basically flying cars being and the Jetsons age coming pretty soon, right? And so on. So we, as a private aviation player in India, we thought, okay, fine, I mean, okay, even if there are these flying cars where you can actually go to work and so on tomorrow, where is the market access? Where is the market enabling ecosystem? You can't just go to a showroom and buy it like how you buy a car, right? And where is the air traffic control? And so there are huge amounts of market gap. There is an opportunity again in countries like India, where there's anyway a lot of congestion despite the low per capita car use. So we saw this as an area of trying to test out to see, okay, fine, I mean, can we try get into the space of basically trying to build a business model around it, so that at that point of time when, I mean, you have really these proven, certified, regulatory approved vehicles available, we could be the first mover in India, right? I mean, and now to do this, obviously we knew that the probability of, I mean, it was super early. There isn't anything out there right now that can actually work. And we knew whatever money that goes down trying to test this out in a real world scenario would probably be putting money down the drain, right? So thankfully, at least, I mean, when we're trying to approach a couple of investors to see who might be interested in testing this out, we actually had a very keen interest from Boeing's Horizon X. So they had a disruptive venture fund called as Horizon X, and for them it was very clear that, I mean, it was something that they anyway knew that they wanted to test out. And even if, say, for example, nothing came out of this in terms of a tangible business opportunity, it would at least give them a lot of insights that would go back in towards their own R&D in building this. And the structure that we worked out there was pretty similar, where we got quite a bit of burn money to test this out using helicopters as a proxy for flying cars in dense urban cities in India to run this for some time. And if that followed through with something that could be a scalable model, then we worked out a structure where, I mean, they would get equity and so on. But yeah, I would say it's quite far and few, opportunistic, and probably, I mean, idiosyncratic and not necessarily the norm in terms of what could be looked at, right? So yeah.
Thank you for that. That's so interesting. So that's an example of what we were just talking about, right? Because you have your standard company, which is Jet Set Go, which has, you know, a sturdy financial stream income and clients already. And then you were willing to partner with someone huge like Boeing, and the two of you together were willing to throw some resources, time, energy, money into the research of something that seems like a pretty far off moonshot, but is already starting to lay the groundwork. And I do think there's some swagger credit, you know, that goes with something like that also kind of, you know, pads the decision a little bit, right? Is that you want to tell people you're working on trying to figure out how to make flying cars feasible in India. Like, that's what an interesting thing to just work on. And I think Boeing would have the same kind of reaction, right? They want to say, we're already trying, we're already doing this. And then that way people can see that they're, you know, potentially innovation and purpose washing, but if they're going to throw some money at it, then I guess that's okay too. One thing So one thing I wanted to just bring up really quickly before I open the floor and get everyone else on the call involved in this interesting conversation, because quite a few of you are in the space or in these very, you know, innovation forward spaces, is the idea that also one additional thought, in addition to, you know, larger companies and people hedging their risk with more stable investments, is also the idea of government-backed innovation, right? Like, that's where NASA came, and we said, okay, if we want to go to the moon, the government has to pay for it, because no one's going to take that level of risk, because it's unfathomable. Like, feasibly, it can't make sense. So the government says, well, we want it, and then they come in and throw money behind it, and that's been up and down ever since we got to the moon that one time. But now I think it's very interesting that actually the government gave Elon Musk a huge loan when he started down his kind of crazy race of innovation that he's currently on. And he ended up paying it back with interest early, actually. And so it's interesting that he was, even though he had all that money, he still was decreasing his risk, right, by putting some of it back on the people that would benefit most from it. So I think that's very interesting to at least the US government. I'm not sure about other countries, but I know the US government, and I know also China as well, and Russia, they all kind of put money and innovation resources into innovation because they want to be seen as the leader in the space. And I know Singapore is doing this as well. I work there, and they have a ton of government grants, which are actually, you don't need to repay it. If you just bring novel innovation into their country and let the IP sit within Singapore, they're going to back you on that, because they want that to be their reputation. They want to be the country of the future. And so that's an interesting, you know, spot where I think a lot of innovation is being backed by potential government entities or, you know, funds, sovereign wealth funds and things like that, who can take, you know, 1% of their enormous balance sheets and throw it and say, okay, we get the marketing value or the whitewashing value, meaning innovation washing value of putting this forward and saying that that's what we're working on. So I think that's a very interesting aspect as well. And so what we want to talk about with the rest of you guys is just what changes, what opportunities and challenges lie ahead for the new kind of type of venture capital that we need in order to progress at the rate that we're currently progressing, whether that's blockchain, Bitcoin, outer space, fintech, anything else that comes up, medical for sure. We're doing all kinds of exciting things in medical, also bricks and mortar. We're doing a lot of things in energy. You know, the world is changing at a rapid rate. And so I'm super interested to hear what you guys are working on and what your thoughts are on this concept of, you know, free range moonshot innovation versus incremental traditional venture capital setup innovation. So what structures, what things do we need to put in place? What are some ideas that you have as to how we can move forward and really open the world up to the level of progress that seems to be coming down the pipeline? So Frank, would you like to talk?
Sure, put a spotlight on me.
Yes, please.
So I guess my view into this comes from both angles, both, having raised capital to go build companies as well as putting money to work. And so this dichotomy between purpose and profit, for me, it's kind of a bit of a false narrative, and maybe I'm just blessed in my experiences around this. Because if you do follow that, though, what sits in the middle of purpose and profit is really two things: intention and patience. And instead of looking at this as a spectrum, think about it as a box you're trying to create. And we're now in a marketplace, particularly in things like fintech, where there's more capital coming in than ever before. And instead of entrepreneurs and innovators trying to sell their company for capital, I find the ones that are most successful have flipped that thinking completely, and they're out there to buy capital. And so when they want to buy that capital from that VC, one of the first things they're going to do is share their purpose, if they've defined their strategy as the purpose of their business. And that's kind of one of the cool things to come out of Saeed in the financial strategy program. Tristan, I can see you nodding your head through your Zoom screen here, but this notion of purpose and strategy being one allows you very quickly to go sit down with investors and say, before we even tell you the what and the how, this is why we're doing it. Do you agree with this? And can you and your LPs get behind this? And that to me is like a critical test for anyone who wants to do the moonshot. Now, if you can clear the why, then there's the what. And in the what and the how, you can balance this risk through some very clever gated funding scenarios. So we've all gone through the Series A, B, C, et cetera. But I think you can start tranching these into finer rounds to say, look, I've got a commitment for a Series B of 50 million, but I'm not going to do the call until these 10 things are achieved. And so you can slice those up even more. And that, I think, helps de-risk a lot of this for investors, but also keeps everyone focused on this notion of purpose and a semblance of patience. Ultimately, though, I think it really comes down to that test where you have to look across the table with the investors and say, are you really going to be with me for the long haul here? Because the average hang time for these investments is 6 to 8 years. And I would just say, if you can't achieve the purpose within 6 to 8 years or make a meaningful dent towards it, then that was less about the strength of the purpose and more about execution. And I think, again, if you can kind of think about it in those 4 ways around purpose, profit, patience, and persistence, or intention, fill out what you want, that's where I think the most successful deals come out. That's it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. That's great. And I think you did bring up something that we talked about yesterday, but we didn't bring up today, which was that time horizon, right? Which is very important. Yeah. Thank you for that, Frank. I'm going to, does anyone else, how about you, Mick? Yeah, hi. Can you unmute?
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Sorry,
hi.
I'm talking to you from Trinidad and Tobago. I got caught out here with the pandemic, so just waited to get the flight back.
Lucky you.
Thank you. It's been a hell of a journey, I'll tell you. When I left BP 5 years ago to go out and do this founder thing, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had to unlearn a lot of stuff and learn some new stuff. And, it's interesting this purpose conversation is being had because I'm involved in the Center for Corporate Reputation, which is led by Rupert Younger, that whole Enacting Purpose initiative that was kicked off a couple of years ago. And, coming out of the corporate world into this world of startups and innovation, right? Particularly, I'm a big fan of open innovation, which is about the sharing of resources across sector for, creativity works to collective advantage. And it's all great terminology, but when it's time to start raising money, investors use a very clear econometric and financial model. The purpose conversation is a language change. That's what I found. And it kind of gives you, if you get this language right, and you're very clear about it, it gives you the sort of license to go in there and start talking about why you need money and what you're going to do with that money and what's the ROI on the money that they're giving you. And it's just a reprogramming of the mind and just a way of doing things. You know, I mean, we've seen it, you know, now the big thing is sustainability and ESG, right? It was CSR, it was CR, it was all this stuff. But now it's a rebranding of something that's been in existence for a very long time. But it's the macro factors that are forcing this change. Now investors are being very, very applying pressure on the organizations to ensure that they're doing something in the right way. A good friend of mine, Zoe Knight, heads up the HSBC's Global Center of Sustainable Financing. And she's an interesting one to have this conversation with, because HSBC as a global bank has been really stepping forward in this space and making some big decisions around this. You know, and you can see it in the way they're restructuring and they even the people they're hiring, you know, and the talent development systems are putting very, very big leans on this. I saw it with BP, you know, when I was there working through all these crises years ago, I kept saying, you need to do X, Y, Z, but the timing wasn't right. Now look at what, you know, Bernard is doing. You know, he has restructured the entire organization. He's moving toward renewables. And if you're not in that space, and you are not developing your skills and behaviors to support that, you can't fit in that organization anymore. Look at, they bought Lightsource, and now they're investing in renewables agendas, right? In renewable startups. So it's a reprogramming of the system, all right? And there's new language, new culture, new behaviors that's required to do this. And that's why it's very important. I think, you know, your point earlier, Robin, about, you know, maintaining energy levels, I will use the word resilience. One of the most difficult things, I mean, I'm 44 now, so I'm an old man. I am not, I'm not the millennial of my day anymore. I've been doing a course in machine learning, and I'll tell you something, I can't even finish the thing yet because it's just difficult for me to learn this stuff and adapt this stuff at this stage. But what I can do is I can remove obstacles. And that's what I'm doing. I'm working within the worlds that I am, government and corporate, to try and remove obstacles so that the next generation of emerging leaders can actually do what they have to do with strength and with commitment. Because it's a tough system. I think the pandemic has forced us to, you know, has applied pressure on all the systems. You know, health system, for example. I have 3 doctors in my team, UK, US, and Trinidad based. And we're now designing an off-grid health management system that we're trying to, you know, we're trying to anchor, we're trying to create diagnostics, fit for purpose diagnostics to reduce surge capacity, but we do it in a renewables, in a carbon net zero way, bringing together health insurance companies, energy companies, and government. Now, that is tough. But what's happened now is the system has now permitted us to have these conversations. So when I go and I speak to, you know, the EVP of BP, Dev Sinyal, and I'm talking to him about the purpose of what we're trying to do, he's getting it. You know, at the top, he's saying, okay, I'll give you the license to have that conversation with people within the team. You're finding more governments, particularly in emerging economies, and I know the big ones like India, and they're far more advanced, but when you start looking at small to mid-sized developing economies, they're still very much anchored in the old world. And there's a huge bit of work that has to be done to transition them out of that. And the private sector is supposed to be the one that's leading that. You know,
I love that. I think
that's
that's, thank you. I love that. I think that's so interesting. And that does resonate with me that, you know, our generation, we might not get to do the really big, sexy stuff. Instead, we kind of need to do the hard stuff, break down the barriers, reframe things, pave the road for the people behind us. And we'll still be a part of it. We might not get to do, like, you know, the most sexy thing out there, but it's important, and it's actually vital, and for us to kind of pave the way for the people behind us. I love that point. Thank you.
We're the brokers, I think. That's what I call us. You know, we're there. I'm having those conversations now, you know, with the Prime Minister and the BP here in Trinidad to try and get this sort of mindset. And I could tell you, it's like pulling teeth. But when I have the purpose conversation in the right way, and it's all about how you have it, right? I can start getting those nuggets of connectivity in what I'm trying to do and trying to broker with the main parties involved. And it is a slightly painful process, but it's getting easier, but it is an iterative process. And with every time we do it, we just got to keep going in there, going in there, going in there all the time, sticking to the script, but supporting that sort of mindset, a paradigm shift. So
I mean,
that, you know,
what a great skill set to have that you're building. I mean, that's like, you'll be like invincible.
I don't know. I'll tell you what. It's you know, when I left my corporate career, right? Everybody asked me, Jesus, why did you leave BP? You know, you would be an SVP at BP now if you'd stayed. I said, well, my corporate career was actually never the journey I embarked on. I was supposed to be a medical doctor. That's initially what the journey I went. And then for some strange reason, I went into this world. When I left at 39, I made a really, really poignant decision and a risky decision to leave your corporate career at that juncture where you're about to do this. Right, they're preparing you for that. That's why I went to Oxford on 2 executive programs, right, in preparation for that. And I thought, look, this is a tipping point. This is a Malcolm Gladwell moment, right? Either stick in there and spend the next 5 years to my mid-40s, right, reinventing myself within a corporate entity, or I leave and I go to champion something that I'm very passionate about, which is about social impact, which is about health and well-being, and I have to say, it's been an incredibly fascinating but a bloody difficult journey. You know, it's been challenging, but that resilience was built up over the past 5 years. And that's where I see my role. I'm staying in my lane. You know, I'm not going to be the person who, you know, comes up with the Elon Musk idea. Well, that's going to be the millennials. They're going to be the ones to do that. What I'm going to be is I'm going to be the obstacle remover and the enabler.
Which brings us back to the incremental part, which is really, thanks for bringing that all the way back around. Yeah, it is. It's still important and it's vital. I want to hear from a couple more people. If you guys have to go, I understand entirely. I'm going to stay a little bit longer. If you guys want to speak, Sarp, I would love to hear from you. And yeah, let's just keep having a conversation for a few more minutes. And if you need to leave, we understand. And thank you so much for being here today. I love Oxford conversations. We were saying that's one of the biggest things we miss about being in Oxford is just going to the pub and having these conversations for hours and hours and hearing everybody's point of view and learning so much from the interaction. So let's hear from Sarp. What do you have to say about this?
Well, thank you, Robin. I do have to go, unfortunately, in a minute, but I'll just add these conversations about purpose. These are what I'm missing as a startup founder who's funding from a government R&D entity. Yeah, the kind of conversation you can't have, and you have to stick with rules and bureaucracy. And I think it's, in a way, even though it's R&D focused, it stifles innovation in kind of the mid to long term. So yeah, well, thank you for this event.
Of course, thank you. Thank you for chiming in. We still have Tristan. Would you like to contribute?
Hi. Okay. I just would like to introduce myself first. I'm currently a private banker in JP Morgan. Previously, I was worked for like CICC and UBS. So actually, my job required me to meet different person. I started like a banking job doing like prime brokerage, totally different stuff. It's market stuff. But later I switched to private bank that required me to learn from each other's story to provide. I don't want to say solutions. The bank always requires you to say solutions, but I just want to say I provide something for you anyway. So that means that I should understand where a person, what people think about, and that's a way I start to gather all this information, know different people, understand what they think about the world, because that finally what the person means is an interaction, the synergy. It's not like something like the bank say or what something the product say. It's all about like synergy and time span, and we talk about purpose and time span, but I think about in the long run, it's all about the synergy in the long time span. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you for that. Thank you for contributing. I appreciate that. Thanks for being here too. I will wrap it up now. I'm so glad you were all here. I think that actually with Mick's comments that Enrico and Miguel might have won our little debate about incremental innovation versus moonshot innovation. Maybe, you know, that's the big shiny thing that we want, that me and Perla want to chase. But our actual role as the generation that we're in is kind of that clearing the way for the people behind us. So I think that's a very valid and interesting point. And so thank you guys for doing all the work and all the spaces that you're doing. I'm excited to see what the future brings, and you're all a key aspect of it. So thank you so much for being here today. Hopefully we can do it again sometime. And I hope you guys got some things to ponder, maybe some new ideas or perspectives to consider. I know I did. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Robin.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Nice to
Thank
meet
you, everyone, and
guys.
thank you, Robin, especially
Sure.
for arranging this.
Yes. Thank you,
Sure.
Robin.
Thank you.
guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, guys.